Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We have a pretty controversial topic on the table today, and that is no changes to the ban list revealed in the most recent strategy presentation as of June 2024. This is probably the most hot topic on social media at the moment, and a lot of people are like, why isn't certain things banned? Why aren't certain things unbanned? And they're not doing anything. Like, what the heck is going on? So here is a video of all of my thoughts from the JP stream. Obviously, the changes here may or may not translate to English, but here are my thoughts, here are my opinions, and big disclaimer, this is what I think. And I guess going forward, let's talk about how this will translate to the global side. So the Bushiroad strategy presentation was on Tuesday with no changes to the ban list whatsoever. Do bear in mind that in JP, they have the ride line restriction for the strat deck sets, as well as the choice restriction for Shiranui and Drag Vader, Luar and Sir Gawain, as well as the release of Elvira and Valsharplon. So how is this kind of interpreted, right? So obviously they released a PDF explaining why none of this was, no decks were hit. And the TLDR is that they deem that it was not sufficient enough. Like a lot of decks are good enough, but it's kind of flawed, right? Because Japan side, they use diversity cut, and diversity cut immediately cuts out pretty much the strongest deck, which is Shiranui at the moment, because they start to bring in more unique decks that come within the the top X range or X1 range towards the top cut, right? So I just wanted to show some data on this. So obviously, big shout out to Fuzzy again for all of the information that we're gonna, I guess, go through on this video. So if we're looking at the JP side, so the Japanese standard decks within the last 3 months, Shiranui is the most dominant deck, where the numbers are pretty much double of the second place being Vanguard. And close behind that is Luar and pretty much every other deck in the format, right? The fact that this doesn't warrant some sort of change is pretty interesting. I think what they're trying to do, and we can see it in Shoujo Doji, is that they're trying to release decks or have ways to be able to cope with Shiranui. But in the long run, I don't actually know if this is a viable strategy for them to be able to, I guess, outclass Shiranui. And we've seen it with Chronojet, we've seen it with Messiah. They obviously look to phase it out and then bring like a bit of support back. But I think Shiranui, the deck set itself, is really strong. Having 7 attacks is pretty nuts, right? So the fact that you see double the numbers of Shiranui, and pretty much that translates to all of the regional events, and even with diversity cut, the numbers are still ridiculous, right? So pretty much nearly every team is bringing it. So I guess it's really surprising that they're not restricting it in any way, right? Sure, they hit it in the previous I guess strategy presentation with the ride line hit and the OT hit, but yeah, it's still strong, still going, and with the dual nation grade 2 makes the early game of this deck really strong. So if a deck has a really good early game, a really good late game, then obviously it's going to be probably the best deck in the format, right? So if you look at something like Varga has a really good early to mid game, but it doesn't really scale well into the late game. Luard has an okay-ish early game, and then translates really well into the late game. Razel as well, Eva as well. There are parts of the whole game where they're the most weakest, right? But Shiranui obviously doesn't have that because of the dual nation grade 2. So the fact that they are not restricting, Shiranui in any way, it is pretty surprising, right? So I guess just going back to this, how does this translate into the global side? So first of all, the global side will probably not see this hit. They will probably see the ride line hit, and going forward, my thoughts is that they should definitely implement the ride line change first, right? This would then align standard for the global side to be the same as the Japan side. So, all strat deck sets need to run the ride line that, is included in the strat deck set, right? So the crest, the corresponding grade 2, and obviously the boss grade 3, right? Then, obviously, we also want to see the choice restriction between Shiranui and Drag Vader. Obviously, Drag Vader is really strong, pretty much an auto win button. If you check it, you just auto win. And yeah, so you want to eliminate that, right? And then if you're hitting Shiranui, you definitely want to hit Luard as well, tame it down a bit. So choice restricting Luard and Sogawan means that the play rate, or I guess the strength of Luard then dims down to the level that we expect it to be, right? And we don't see a lot of Willista, so uplifting the choice restriction for Elvira and Valsha Blunt is completely fine. And you know, we have the new lyrical set coming out soon, so you know, all the more reason for you to essentially lift this ban, right? And the question is that will we see any other bans? Will we see any other choice restriction? Probably not, right? And the reality is that we don't have Festival Collection yet, so we don't have the hostage package for Keta. We don't have the Dual Nation cards yet, so being able to hit this straight away, going into the set 2 meta is completely fine, and then waiting a little bit for the Festival Collection, that will be sufficient, right? Obviously, Shunu will still see really high play rate, but I think there are decks out there that can, you know, keep up with Shunui, right? And obviously, you know, a lot of people say that Shunui is probably the best deck in the format at the moment. There is a counter argument where Luard could be the best deck in the format, right? Obviously with Sogawan, anyways. So yeah, my thoughts is that Standard will probably get these changes in the global side, and I hope they do. So I guess now the big hot topic is, what about the other formats, right? What about V? What about Premium? And I'll start with V. And I'll be very, very honest, and I'll be completely transparent here. I think V is in a position where it's being phased out. And it's been writing on the wall for a very, very long time. And, you know, they should just do it, right? But obviously, you know, they can't just axe a format straight away. They have to transition it out. And like we see now, Springfest is in a tri-regulation format, which this is probably the one and ever time that probably will do it. And I hope to see, you know, tri-regulation get like removed for the next year, and then go back to, you know, Standard and Premium. And that's probably like the best, I guess, scene that we'll see in the competitive scene, right? And because they're doing this tri-regulation format, you know, pretty much sifting out V, they haven't hit Gurgut, and Gurgut is the biggest talking point in V. So I guess let's just go back to the stats real quick. So V Premium, you know, Gurgut is triple the amount of the second place, second being Anj, which is ridiculous, right? So obviously, you know, Gurgut is a big threat. But if they're phasing out the format, like, why hit it, right? Just let everything go. And, you know, if you really want to send out a V format, you might as well just unban everything, right? Unban everything and, you know, let chaos just, you know, go through the format, see what happens, and then remove the format, right? That'd be pretty cool. But if, let's just say, you know, we are actively looking at the format itself and, you know, having a go at trying to fix the format, then the first thing I would probably do is to choice restrict the VPR and Gurgut, right? But this is all in a fantasy world. This is just my opinion. And the reason why Gurgut came back is because this VPR is busted, right? The fact that you can call 2 instead of 1 means that you get 2 extra attacks off of Gurgut with the power scaling of Gurgut, right? Which makes Gurgut really strong, right? And I guess that was like the same application with Percival before, because Percival would create another Excel, which means it's another attack, right? So all in all, you know, the synergy between these two cards makes Gurgut really strong. So if you want to hit it in some way, hit the consistency of the deck, and hit its power scaling, right? Then you want to choice restrict this, you know, VPR with Gurgut so that it doesn't have an insane multi-attack, right? So like before, it still had Max Slash, it still had, you know, Wonder Ezel, it still had, you know, the extending mechanics, but, you know, you have to kind of expend cards instead of just boosting and free calling 2 cards for free, right? It's just pretty unfair, right? So I guess that is pretty much the V Premium side of things. I guess like just tracking back a little bit to the standard decks for the global side, if we look at the past 3 months, Shunui is pretty much nearly double the amount of decks that came in second, which is Luard, and then pretty much Luard is nearly double the one in third place, right? So these 2 decks, you know, if you're hitting with the ride line restriction, then you obviously have to hit Luard so that all the numbers kind of even up again, right? And this is only within the last 3 months, which is the Springfest season, which is crazy, right? Shiranui being the most dominant deck, and this is translated in both global side and Japan side, right? So first things first, you, hit the rad line, choice restrict OT and Oboro, and then choice restrict wide with Sir Gauten, right? And then you see these numbers maybe, you know, dim down a little bit, but you will still see tops, and this number will probably still sit at the top for a while because, you know, high volume of players within the 3 months, so it takes a longer time to kind of even up the numbers. So you'll probably have to wait like 6 to 9 months to be able to see that number kind of go back to normal again, right? But anyways, going back to V, this is what I would do if I were to save the format, but let's be real, just finish the format and call it a day, right? Then we have standard and premium, call it a day, and yeah, you know, don't have to worry about, you know, events clashing for like tournament organizers and whatnot, and, you know, be done with it, right? So then the next topic is, what about premium, right? We didn't get any premium collection. We got like, sure, like the Harry Stride deck set for standard, the Night Rose Stride deck set for standard, like, and sure, we got like the heal grade 1s for shop tournaments. Like, that's not real support, right? We're not getting anything new. We're not getting any new strides, bar the Stride deck sets, obviously. So no premium collection. Like, well, what the heck's going on, right? Like, they would be releasing a premium collection at this time, and they didn't, right? Maybe they release it like at the start of the next year, and then, you know, BCS 24-25 will probably, you know, run later into the year, and we might see some change. But at the moment, nothing is going to happen, right? So how would I fix the format at the moment, right? So to be honest, I think the format at the moment has the three most represented decks, and that is Shiranui, Katrina, and Night Rose, right? And then the following deck from that is Gridora. As you can see, the numbers kind of align, and then Gridora is next in line with 10 and a Highlander at 9, right? So obviously a big gap of 6 in terms of the total tops across the last 3 months, right? But then if you look at it from all-time perspective, right? Beatrice Toolbox, so Grand Blue in general, is at 58 with Night Rose at 40, so it's like 98, which actually puts it at second place, right? These two decks are quite similar, so if you put that into perspective, it's actually the second most represented deck without a ban, right? Or without a choice restriction of any kind. Eradicator's got hit, Highlander got hit with Katia, Steam Maiden got hit with the Colossus, Nightmare Doll and Tharvas pretty much served its time. It was a ride down deck, and it was pretty much made for the format. And then obviously the next in line is Beatrice Toolbox or Night Rose, right? So these two, well, this particular deck has not seen a hit and probably deserves one, right? Playability, well, the play rate of this deck is really high. The topping rate is really high, at least on the Western side, because Japan doesn't really have premium tournaments, right? And then the next one is Gridora, right? Gridora obviously is played to counter, you know, these superior calling decks, right? But there has been a real hot topic previously, is like Gridora, the grade 4, is actually a card that makes the experience of premium really bad, right? So I wanted to, I guess, propose something that I've kind of been thinking about, and obviously, again, this is my opinion. So the first thing I would probably hit would be the Gridora grade 4 to 1. And the reason why is that if you are trying to introduce players into premium and you get put in front of Gridora and you're a superior calling deck, like, your game just ends, right? Like, there's nothing you can do about it. Gridora just stops you, stuns your Vanguard, and doesn't allow you to superior call. It's like a super gatekeeping card. It's a floodgate, right? So having an unfun experience in a premium event probably is not a good idea, right? But I don't want to ban it completely, because then it removes a really strong stride that Mega Colony probably needs because of how weak the clan is, right? Obviously, you know, going forward, maybe there's like, you know, cards that make Mega Colony better, but obviously at this point in time, it's just not the case, right? But the card itself is actually really, really strong because it stops your opponent's Vanguard, it stuns them, so your opponent has to rewrite a grade 3, ditch a grade 3 and then they can't superior core anything for 4 turns straight, right? Like, Mega Colony has insane CC, being able to have this effect for free, has pretty much minimum 4 attacks. It's really, really strong, right? So I think going forward, Ghidorah to 1 is completely fine. I think it's, you know, a card that will still be playable. It doesn't kill the deck off. You will probably see a decreased rate. And if you're really stopping your opponent from superior calling, you still have Optorandus, right? A little bit of a heavy cost, but at least you don't stun your opponent's Vanguard. Then at least they can still play. They can still, you know, go forward with their superior calling stuff, right? So that is probably my proposition for that deck. And then the next one is Katrina. So I would choice restrict Lilgar and Katrina, right? So I've obviously played this deck, and I know that a lot of other players have played this deck. This deck saw 2 toppings, 1 top 4 and 1 top 8 at Worlds, was not hit, and then we saw a bunch of it, you know, across the BSF season. And I think this deck itself is pretty much free from top to bottom, right? Free multi-attack, free token generating, free unit generating, free recursion, free CC, free perfect guards. It's literally everything's free, right? So essentially you call Lilgar off Katrina, you get 3 PGs into hand, you have Enlargulf Soul Blast 1, grab a heal back, it's free, technically. Katrina has multi-attack for free. Cyclone gives a free 5k to your plant tokens for every copy that's flipped up. Pretty much everything is free, right? So how do we hit this deck, right? And obviously Katrina just got unrestricted, and it's a very strong stride, but I think it's good in its own right? Obviously the power scaling from when it was first released to now, you know, there's a huge difference, right? But, you know, if, for example, they don't want to put Katrina onto the ban list or restrict it to 1 again, like, how do we resolve that? And to resolve that, you choice restrict the free PG mechanic with Katrina, right? So if you're playing Katrina, you obviously don't get the free defense, right? You still have to work for it. You can Anelma to draw, you know, you have to hard draw your PGs. You have to check your draw PGs if you're playing draw PGs. You just don't get it for free, right? Alternatively, you know, if you don't want to play Katrina, then you get free PGs and you have to use all the other strides to, you know, build up your board and, you know, attack, right? And obviously, you know, with the choice restriction between the two, you can have one or the other, just not both, right? So I think, you know, if you're hitting Katrina in any way, I think you would hit it in this way. And then that way, you know, it doesn't kill the deck. Katrina will still be a very viable deck. You know, free multi-attack. You still have your horticulture to multi-attack with your plant tokens. You still get like, what, 1, 2, 3, 7 attacks or something like that. It's still a valid deck, right? So I think this is completely fine. It's not shutting down the deck. It's just eating away at one of its unfair engines in the deck, right? So that would be my next thing. So then the other talking points, like you hit these 2 decks, you obviously have to hit Shunui and Night Rose, right? In some way, right? To turn it down. But how would I do that, right? So this slide is probably the most controversial of this whole video. And this is probably my opinion, and I might be wrong, I might be right. But these are my reasonings for it, right? So how would I hit Shunui and Granblue would be this way, right? So I would first of all ban Sukumura-kan, right? Sukumura-kan is ultimately a really unfair card, right? Especially with the nature of what Nubatama has access to. It has access to Furai, it has access to Dominate. Sukumura-kan, the card itself is really unfair, right? Tie that with a crest, you have multi-attack, you're pretty much guarding like 5 attacks with 4 cards in hand. If you get set at 5 damage, that's it. There's only one deck in the format that could probably guard that, and that is Granblue, right? Granblue can then recur their Heal Guardians with these 2 on the screen, so Beatrice and Greedshade, but that's probably the only deck that can do that, right? You have to like mid-battle disruption, like your opponent's multi-attacking cards, but the crest just like scales the power too high, right? But Sukumura-kan, I think, you know, ban it, right? If you're playing Rinne, right, I would happily go through Rinne if I still have the other, you know, 11 cards in my hand. I have 15 cards, I drop 2, I spend 2 cards to guard the 2 dominated units. Cool, no worries. I'm happy to go through, 5 attacks with 11 cards in hand. Like, that's completely fine. But if you rip my hand to 4, go 5, potentially 6 attacks with domination as well, like, that's really unfair, right? Even if it's like just 13k, and I'm at 5 damage, right? Like, it's just really, really strong. Pretty much an auto win card, right? You tie that with Crest, you can technically do that from like 4 damage, right? It's super, super unfair, right? So I think the card itself should be banned, right? I think in previous iterations, hand ripping cards or cards that reduce the hand have been banned before, right? So cards like the Crow got banned, Jamio Congo got banned. So, this card technically should be banned, right? But then again, obviously you get the cards back. So that's like the second part of it. But in its entirety, hand ripping just means that you're unable to guard, right? There is another discussion. You could probably put Mizukaze on this list, which is probably something that, potentially could happen in the future. I think Mizukaze is a really unfair card. But I think, you obviously have to target this first. Mizukaze probably should be on this list as well. It's a really unfair card. So yeah, maybe like I'm missing a slide here. Maybe I have to put in Mizukaze, right? Another really unfair guard district probably should be put on this list, right? Anyways, that's Nobutama. So how do we deal with the last elephant in the room, right? Grand Blue. So Grand Blue is, if you look at every single list, it's pretty much a Highlander list with 4 Columbard, right? With 2 Beatrice, 2 Dragons, and pretty much one-offs of like every single other card in the deck, right? Maybe Negrobone is at 3, cool, no worries. Negrobone is a fair card, completely fine. You're discarding one to revive one, that's pretty much spending a card, right? Beatrice is pretty much the most flexible card in the deck, but this deck is so flexible, like, how do we hit it, right? And again, it's the same treatment as Katrina, hit a part of the deck that makes it good, right? If you choice restrict these 2, right, it means that you eliminate the recurring heals in the battle phase. So what you can actually do at the moment is you G-Guard into Negro Lily. Negro Lily calls Beatrice. Beatrice then calls Greed Shade. Greed Shade then discards a card to get the heal back, right? And then you can keep looping that because essentially Negro Lily just sacks something, sacks the Beatrice. Beatrice then calls Greed Shade, and then you get it again, right? So you pretty much have 4 iterations of recycling heals during your opponent's battle phase, right? Makes this deck really unfair because the hand is already big, right? And you're getting free heals. That's like 1 card guard for something that would be usually 2 to 3 card guard, right? So if you eliminate that, right, then the deck is still functioning, right? You still get all your ghost ships. You can still salvage heals using Enlargolf. You still can, Beatrice into Cannoneer to sniper unit. You can still Beatrice into Honolly to stop multi-attack. You still have, everything else. You can still Beatrice into Mick to give your opponent 10, put your Vanguard plus 10k. You still have that, but I think recurring heals during your opponent's battle phase is actually really, really strong, right? So if you hit that, you just tame the deck down, and I think that's completely fine, right? Sure, if you hit Greed Shade alone, then it's gonna be like, oh yeah, I just don't have access to be able to play this particular card. But sometimes, somewhere in the future, maybe they release something that is better than Beatrice, right? So then you want to play Greed Shade. But time will tell. And Greed Shade is a really strong card. Being able to fetch anything from your drop zone back into your hand is a really strong card, but it's not completely broken, right? But it's completely broken or really, really, really strong when it's combined with Beatrice during your opponent's battle phase, right? So I think, if you are going to hit Night Rose, then you would choice restrict these 2, right? Obviously, again, this is in a fantasy world. This is like, if, there's rainbows and happy days and, sunshine everywhere, then this is like, my optimal world, right? But then again, Night Rose is, kind of being contested by Shunui and Neonectar at the moment. But then again, ultimately they could hit nothing, right? And why is that? Is that they're trying to push for other decks to be better, right? But the only way to do that is to give premium support, but we don't have any of that, right? So yeah, these are my thoughts on the ban list and how it translates into global. This is probably a great, way to discuss this. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think of pretty much the no changes in JP, how it translates into English, and these fictional bans that I'm putting in for the fighters rule. If you guys like these sort of discussion videos, pop a like, comment down below what you guys think of all these opinions that I have. They're probably super copium or super hopium. So yeah, if you guys haven't already, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.